Story 1. The Echoing Chart. I found the first duplicate around 2 a.m. tucked behind the vitals monitor in Bay 7, same patient, same handwriting, same timestamp. I thought someone had printed it twice. But when I checked the system, there were now 3 entries, each one slightly different, like the chart was correcting itself in real time. By morning, there were 9 versions, and the last one had my name listed as the patient. I started my ER rotation in mid-September, the kind of quiet Tuesday night where the waiting room smelled like stale coffee, and the monitors beeped in near-perfect rhythm. I was 3 months into my internship at Mercy General, still adjusting to the weight of the stethoscope around my neck and the way attending physicians spoke in coded half-sentences I was expected to decode instantly. My supervising resident, Dr. Brennan, had gone upstairs to consult on a stroke case, leaving me alone with 4 stable patients and a stack of discharge paperwork. I liked the quiet. It gave me time to double-check my notes, review labs, make sure I hadn't missed anything that would come back to haunt me during morning rounds. Bay 7 held a middle-aged man named Richard Calloway. Chest pain, ruled out for MI, waiting on final cardiology clearance. Standard stuff. I'd charted his vitals at midnight, documented his EKG, noted his stable rhythm, clean and straightforward. At 2:14 a.m., I went back to check on him. He was asleep. Oxygen sat steady at 97%, heart rate in the low 60s. I reached for the chart clipped to the foot of his bed to add a progress note. That's when I saw it. There were 2 charts, identical blue folders, both labeled Calloway Richard Bay 7. I picked up the second one, frowning. The handwriting inside was mine. Same pen, same slant to my letters, same timestamp, 000. But the vitals were different, slightly. His heart rate was listed as 68 instead of 64. Blood pressure 128/82 instead of 130/80. I assumed I'd made an error, written it down wrong the first time. I pulled out my phone to check the digital record. 3 entries, all under my name, all time-stamped at midnight. I stared at the screen, my throat tightening. The system didn't allow duplicate entries. It flagged overlapping documentation automatically. But here they were, stacked like echoes, each one a near copy of the last with tiny variations I couldn't explain. I deleted 2 of them, logged it as a clerical error. Went back to the nurse's station and made a mental note to mention it to IT in the morning. By 3 a.m., there were 5 charts for Richard Calloway. I hadn't touched the system since my last deletion. But now the entries had multiplied again, each one branching into slight variations. In one version, I'd noted he complained of nausea. In another, I'd documented a brief episode of dizziness. In a third, I'd written that he seemed anxious, though I'd never observed that. The details were things I might have noticed. Could have noticed, but hadn't. I went back to Bay 7. Calloway was still asleep, undisturbed. I checked his wristband, confirmed his identity. Everything matched. He was real, stable, unremarkable. I pulled up the charts again on the computer. Now there were 7. In the 6th entry, I had documented a conversation we never had. According to my notes, Calloway had asked me if I ever felt like I was living the same day twice. I'd reassured him it was just the medication. The timestamp read 02:47, 3 minutes ago. My hands went cold. I hadn't spoken to him since midnight. I looked over my shoulder at Bay 7. Calloway's eyes were open now, staring at the ceiling. I walked over slowly, keeping my voice calm. "Mr. Calloway, you doing okay?" He didn't look at me. "You already asked me that." "When?" "Just now." I felt my pulse quicken. "I haven't been in here since midnight." He turned his head toward me, his expression flat. "You were just here. You said you needed to check something." I glanced at the monitor. His vitals were stable, no alarms, no changes. "What did I check?" I asked carefully. "My chart," he said. You kept looking at it, like you didn't believe it. I felt the floor tilt slightly beneath me. I excused myself, walked back to the computer, pulled up the records again. 9 entries now. In the 8th, I had noted that Calloway reported seeing me twice in the same hour. I had written that I would monitor for confusion, possible side effect of medication. But I hadn't written that. I was reading it for the first time. In the 9th entry, dated 03:12, 2 minutes from now, I had documented that I was experiencing unusual fatigue and visual disturbances. I had requested a break and left the floor. I stared at the screen, my breath shallow. The clock in the corner ticked over to 03:12. I stood up and walked toward the exit. I didn't plan to. My legs just moved. Dr. Brennan appeared at the end of the hall, chart in hand. You okay? You look pale. I need a minute, I heard myself say. I went to the break room, sat down and closed my eyes. My hands were shaking. I opened my phone and checked the hospital system remotely. 11 entries for Richard Calloway. In the 10th, I had written that I felt like I was being watched, that the hospital seemed smaller than usual, the hallways narrower. In the 11th, I had noted that I didn't remember writing the previous entry. I refreshed the page. 15 entries. They were appearing faster now, every few seconds, each one a version of my shift that I hadn't lived but somehow recognized. In one, I had called my attending. In another, I had checked Calloway's labs 3 times. In another, I had stood in base 7 for 20 minutes without moving. I shut off my phone and sat in silence. When I returned to the ER 30 minutes later, Calloway's bay was empty. The bed was stripped, the monitors off. I checked the discharge log, no record of his release. I went to the nurse's station. Where's the patient from Bay 7? The charge nurse looked up at me, confused. Bay 7's been empty all night. Richard Calloway, I said. Chest pain. I've been monitoring him since midnight. She pulled up the census. No one by that name. I opened my phone, pulled up my documentation. The entries were gone. All of them, except one. A single chart, time-stamped 0:0, under my name. The patient listed was intern, ER, Bay 7. The vitals matched mine. Heart rate elevated, blood pressure climbing. The notes were in my handwriting. And at the bottom, in careful block letters, someone had written, still on shift. Still watching. I looked up at the board. Bay 7 was listed as occupied, assigned to me. I walked toward it slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. The curtain was drawn. I reached for it, pulled it aside. The bed was empty. But the chart clipped to the footboard had my name on it, and it was starting to fill itself in. Some patients never leave, and some charts keep writing long after the pen is set down. I don't look at Bay 7 anymore, but every night around 2 a.m., I feel the weight of a second clipboard in my hand, one I never picked up, and I wonder if I'm still the one holding the pen. Story 2. The rewritten consent. I didn't recognize the signature at first. It looked like mine, same initials, same slant, but older, shakier, like my hand had aged 30 years overnight. The patient name meant nothing to me. But the date was last Tuesday, and the procedure I'd allegedly performed hadn't been done at this hospital in over a decade. When I checked the archives, I found 6 more, all signed by me. All for patients I'd never met. All dated years I hadn't lived yet. I've been a trauma surgeon for 19 years. I know the weight of a scalpel, the rhythm of a code, the particular silence that falls over an OR when you've lost someone. I know my handwriting. I've signed thousands of consent forms, operative notes, death certificates. I could pick my signature out of a stack in the dark. So when I found the consent form in the pre-op staging area that Tuesday morning, I knew immediately that something was wrong. The form was clipped to a chart for a patient named Elliot Verne, scheduled for an emergency splenectomy following blunt abdominal trauma. Standard case. The kind I'd done 100 times, but I had no memory of seeing this patient. No memory of the consult, the exam, the conversation that precedes every surgery. And yet, there was my signature, dated 2 days prior, witnessed, legally binding. I pulled up the patient's file on the system. No record of Elliot Verne in our database. No admission, no imaging, no labs. I showed the form to Dr. Lindgren, my chief resident. She looked it over, frowned. "This isn't in the system," she said. "I know." "Did you see this patient in the field? Transfer case?" "I don't remember seeing anyone by this name." She studied the signature. "That's definitely your handwriting." I took the form back, staring at it. The signature looked like mine, but not quite. The letters were more compressed, the baseline shaky. Like I'd signed it in a moving vehicle, or under duress, or much later in life. I filed it away, assuming it was a misfiled document from another hospital, and moved on with my day. Appendectomy at noon, GSW to the abdomen at 3, routine closures and follow-ups until evening rounds. At 9 p.m., I found another one. This time it was in the surgical lounge, tucked inside a binder of outdated protocols. Another consent form, different patient, Morris Aldridge, but the same procedure, emergency splenectomy, signed by me. Dated 4 months ago. I checked the system. No Morris Aldridge, no record of the surgery. But the signature was mine. Same shaky baseline, same compressed letters. I began searching the archives, old files, storage rooms, records waiting to be digitized. Over the next 3 days, I found 6 more, all consent forms. All for emergency splenectomies, all signed by me, all for patients who didn't exist. The dates ranged over the last 2 years, but none of them matched shifts I'd actually worked. The most recent was dated 3 weeks from now. I brought them to the hospital's legal department. They ran the signatures through verification. The analysis came back positive. Forensically, they were mine. Same pressure patterns, same pen grip, same idiosyncrasies in the capital letters. But I hadn't signed them. I started keeping a journal, writing down every surgery, every patient, every consent form I actually signed. I photographed my hand at the end of each shift to document any tremors or changes. I wanted proof, evidence that I was still in control, but the forms kept appearing. I found one in my locker, one in the glove box of my car, one slipped between the pages of a textbook I hadn't opened in years. The ones and names were becoming familiar. I'd see Elliot Verne and feel a strange tug of recognition, like I'd met him in a dream. I'd read Morris Aldridge and remember the weight of a scalpel I'd never held. I started dreaming about the surgeries. In the dreams, I was older. My hands were slower, stiffer. The OR was dimmer, the equipment outdated. I'd make the same incisions, follow the same steps, but the patients never woke up. They'd lie there on the table staring at me, and I'd realize I'd done this before, many times before, and I'd always signed the consent. One night, unable to sleep, I went down to the hospital's records archive, a converted basement space filled with file cabinets and banker's boxes dating back 40 years. I wanted to see if there was any precedent, any other surgeon who'd experienced something similar. I found my own file. It was thicker than it should have been. I pulled it out, flipped through the pages. My training records, board certifications, disciplinary notes, none, thankfully. And then near the back, a section I didn't recognize. Operative logs, dozens of them. Dated between 2027 and 2031, 4 years from now. I sat down on the cold concrete floor and read through them. Every entry was in my handwriting. The older version, the shaky one. Every surgery was an emergency splenectomy. Every patient matched a name from the phantom consent forms. And in every case, the outcome was the same. Patient expired on table. Cause, uncontrollable hemorrhage. My hands were shaking as I flipped to the last page. There was a final entry. Dated December 14th, 2031. The patient name was listed as Brennan, self-admit. The procedure, emergency splenectomy. The outcome, consent signed. Procedure incomplete. Surgeon unresponsive. I closed the file. When I looked up, I was no longer in the archive. I was in an OR. The lights were dim, the monitors were off. The table was empty, but the instruments were laid out, sterile, gleaming, ready. I looked down at my hands. They were older, scarred. The kind of hands that had held too many scalpels, made too many cuts. On the tray beside me was a consent form. Patient name, Brennan, Leonard. My name. I picked up the pen. My hand moved without me, signing in that compressed, shaky script I'd come to recognize. And then I was back in the archive, sitting on the floor, the file still open in my lap. I checked my phone. No time had passed. But my right hand ached, like I'd been gripping something too tightly for too long. I left the file where it was and went home. I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table and wrote down everything I could remember. Every name, every date, every detail. The next morning I received a page from the ER. Elliot Verne. Blunt abdominal trauma. Spleen lac. Needs or now. I stood in the hallway outside the trauma bay, staring at the name on the board. He was real. I went in, mid-30s, pale, tachycardic. Exactly as I'd imagined, exactly as I dreamed. I examined him. Ordered the imaging, confirmed the injury, and then I pulled out the consent form. He signed it without hesitation, his hand steady and sure. I looked down at the witness line. My hand moved. I signed. The letters came out compressed, shaky, familiar. I had done this before. Or I was about to. Elliot Verne survived the surgery, but when I checked the chart the next day, the consent form I'd signed was gone. In its place was a new one, dated 3 years from now, signed in the same hand for a patient I hadn't met yet. I don't know if I'm writing my future or reading my past, but every time I sign a consent, I feel like I'm adding my name to a list I'll never finish. And somewhere, in an OR I haven't entered yet, a version of me is still holding the pen. Some signatures outlast the hand that writes them. I still operate. I still sign. But I've stopped looking at the dates, because the closer I get to 2031, the more I recognize the faces on the table. And I'm starting to wonder who'll be holding the scalpel when my name finally comes up. Story 3. The disappearing dosages. The vial was there at 11 p.m., 25 milligrams logged and sealed. By midnight it was gone. By 12:15 it was back, but the label had changed. The handwriting wasn't mine, but it was familiar. And the timestamp said it had been dispensed 3 hours from now. I checked the patient logs. The dose had already been given. To someone I hadn't met yet. I've worked as an ER pharmacist for 7 years. My job is precision. Dosage calculations, drug interactions, verifying orders before they reach the patient. It's a job built on systems, protocols, and the comforting certainty that numbers don't lie. Until they started changing. It began in late October during a stretch of double shifts that blurred together into one long fluorescent-lit haze. I was stationed in the small pharmacy alcove just off the main ER floor at Riverside Memorial. A closet-sized room packed with automated dispensing cabinets, reference binders, and the steady hum of a refrigeration unit that never quite shut off. The first anomaly was small, a discrepancy in the controlled substances log. I'd dispensed 2 milligrams of lorazepam at 10:47 p.m. for a patient in Bay 3, documented, witnessed, locked. At 11:15, I went to pull another dose for a different patient. The system flagged it. According to the log, I'd already dispensed lorazepam twice that hour. I pulled up the records. There were 2 entries under my access code. Same drug, same dose. But the second entry was time-stamped 11:32 p.m., 17 minutes in the future. I stared at the screen, my pulse ticking upward. The system didn't allow forward-dated entries, it couldn't. The timestamps were auto-generated at the moment of access. I logged out, logged back in. The entry was still there. I called over Janet, the charge nurse. She looked at the screen, frowned. "Probably a server sync issue," she said. "It's been weird all week." I filed a ticket and moved on. But I kept checking the log throughout the night. By 2 a.m., there were 5 entries I didn't recognize, all time-stamped in the future, all under my access code. And the strangest part, the medications listed were ones I would have pulled. The doses matched the patients I'd end up seeing later in the shift. It was like the system was predicting my actions before I made them. I started testing it. At 3:10 a.m., I checked the log. It showed I would dispense 10 milligrams of metoprolol at 3:45 a.m. I waited. At 3:42, I got a call from Dr. Brennan. Patient in base 6, hypertensive, needed beta blocker. I pulled the metoprolol. Dispensed at 3:44, close enough. I went back to the log. The original entry, the one time-stamped 3:45, was gone, replaced by my actual dispense time of 3:44. The system was correcting itself, or I was. I stopped sleeping between shifts. I started taking screenshots of the logs, documenting every discrepancy. I wanted proof that I wasn't imagining it. But the more I documented, the stranger it became. Some entries weren't just future dated, they were past dated. Medications I'd supposedly dispensed weeks ago for patients I'd never heard of. The notes attached to those entries were written in a handwriting I recognized but couldn't place. Neat, clinical, with a slight backward slant. It looked like mine, but older, more careful. One night I found a vial in the cabinet that shouldn't have been there. Morphine sulfate, 15 milligrams. But the label was handwritten, not printed. The ink was faded, the paper yellowed at the edges. The lot number didn't match anything in our current inventory. I checked the system. No record of it. I set it aside, planning to flag it for disposal. When I came back an hour later, it was gone. But the next night, it was back. Same vial, same label. But now there was a note attached, written on a torn slip of prescription pad. Administered 0217, patient non-responsive, see attending. The handwriting was mine. I checked the patient logs for 0217, nothing. No morphine administered, no patient matching the dose. I kept the note. Over the next week, I found 6 more vials, each one labeled by hand. Each one accompanied by a note in my handwriting describing an administration I had no memory of. The patients named in the notes didn't exist in our system, but I started recognizing the names. Elliot Verne, Morris Aldrich. Others I couldn't place but felt certain I'd seen before, written on charts I'd never touched. I started pulling the medications listed in the future-dated logs before I was paged for them. I thought I could get ahead of it. Control it, but every time I dispensed early, the system corrected itself backward. The timestamp would shift to match my action. The note would rewrite itself. It was like the hospital was learning my patterns, or I was learning its. One Saturday night during a rare lull, I went down to the hospital's pharmaceutical archives. Boxes of outdated inventory logs, expired medications, and records kept for legal compliance. I found a logbook from 2031, 7 years from now. I opened it carefully, the pages brittle and stiff. The entries were handwritten, every single one, and they were all in my handwriting. I flipped through slowly, my throat tight. Each page detailed medications dispensed, dosages calculated, patients treated. The notes were meticulous, professional, but the outcomes were all the same. Patient non-responsive, dosage error suspected, investigation pending, every entry, every patient. I got to the last page. The final entry was dated November 18th, 2031. The medication, Midazolam, 12 milligrams. The patient, pharmacist, ER, self-administered. The note beneath it, found unresponsive in dispensing alcove. Time of death estimated 0304. I closed the book. I was shaking. When I looked up, I was no longer in the archive. I was standing in front of the dispensing cabinet, a syringe in my hand. The label read, Midazolam, 12 mg. I set it down carefully and stepped back. The system beeped. A new entry appeared on the screen. Dispensed 0302, patient pending. I checked the time on my phone. 0301. I walked out of the pharmacy. I didn't run. I didn't look back. The next morning, I checked the logs remotely. The Midazolam entry was gone, but there was a new note attached to my account. Access suspended pending review. I haven't been back to the dispensing alcove, but every night around 3 a.m. I get a notification on my phone. An automated alert from the system. Medication ready for pickup. I never open it, but I know what it says. Because I've already read it, 7 years from now. Some systems don't just track what you've done, they track what you will do. And the more you try to correct them, the more accurate they become. I don't dispense medications anymore, but somewhere in the hospital's memory, I'm still standing in front of that cabinet, still holding the syringe, still waiting for the time to match. Story 4. The unscheduled imaging. The scan was labeled STAT, Trauma Bay 2, but no one had called for imaging. I pulled it up anyway. The fractures were clean, bilateral, radiating from the wrists like someone had been restrained too tightly for too long. I checked the patient name. It was mine. And the timestamp said the study had been ordered 6 hours from now. I'm a radiology resident in my second year, rotating through the ER to assist with urgent imaging. My days are CT scans, X-rays, ultrasounds, reading the body's silent testimony in shades of gray. I've learned to see what others miss, the hairline fracture, the subtle pneumothorax, the tumor hiding in plain sight. But I'd never seen an image that hadn't been requested. It appeared in the queue on a Wednesday morning, tucked between a chest X-ray and a head CT. The study was labeled unscheduled, ER overflow, which wasn't a designation I recognized. No ordering physician, no patient wristband number, just a scan. I opened it. The image showed a forearm, clean AP and lateral views. The fracture pattern was unusual. Bilateral, symmetric, radiating outward from the wrists in a starburst configuration. The kind of injury you'd see from acute, sustained compression. The bone density looked wrong, too thin, like the patient had been immobilized for months. I checked the metadata, no patient name, no medical record number. The timestamp read 1447, 6 hours ahead of the current time. I flagged it for the attending, Dr. Pascal. She pulled it up, studied it for a moment, and frowned. Did someone page you for this? No, it just appeared. She scrolled through the metadata. No ordering info, probably a system test. Delete it. I archived it instead. The next day there were 3 more, all unscheduled, all unlabeled, all time-stamped in the future. The first was a pelvic X-ray showing a fractured sacrum. The second, a skull series with a depressed fracture at the occiput. The third, a chest CT revealing bilateral rib fractures and a hemothorax that should have required immediate intervention. But no patients had come in with those injuries. I checked the ER log. No trauma activations, no codes. The images existed without the bodies. I started saving them, screenshots, metadata, timestamps. I wanted documentation, proof. Within a week, I had 27 unscheduled scans. They were appearing faster now, sometimes 2 or 3 in a single shift. Each one detailed a different injury, traumas, hemorrhages, foreign bodies embedded in tissue, the kind of findings that would have sent a patient to the OR immediately. But no one was arriving. And then I noticed the pattern. The injuries were escalating. Progressive. The first scans showed minor fractures, then dislocations, then internal bleeding, then catastrophic trauma. It was like I was watching someone deteriorate in real time, except the scans were all from different patients. Or so I thought. One night, during a quiet shift, I pulled up all 27 scans and arranged them chronologically by timestamp. The bone structure was consistent. Same height, same build, same skeletal markers. It was the same person. I zoomed in on a chest CT, studying the clavicle. There was a small, healed fracture on the left side, old, barely visible. I knew that fracture. I'd broken my collarbone in high school, 17 years ago. I pulled up my own imaging history from the hospital system, found the old X-ray from my adolescent file. The fracture matched. I sat back staring at the screen. The unscheduled scans weren't random, they were me. I checked the timestamps again. They ranged from hours to days in the future. The furthest was dated 2 weeks ahead. I clicked on it. The scan was a full-body CT. The findings were extensive. Multiple fractures, organ contusions, widespread hemorrhage. The kind of trauma you'd see after a fall from significant height or prolonged, repetitive injury. At the bottom of the report, there was a single line of text, auto-generated by the system. Patient status, unresponsive, study complete. I printed the report and took it home. That night, I dreamed I was in the scanner. The machine was older than the ones we use now, louder, slower, more confined. I could feel the table beneath me, cold and unyielding. I tried to move, but I was restrained. Straps across my chest, my wrists, my ankles. The scanner whirred to life. I heard the familiar hum, the clicking rhythm of the X-ray tube rotating around me, and then I saw it. Through the narrow opening of the bore, I could see myself standing at the console, older, thinner, watching the images appear on the screen. I tried to call out, but my voice wouldn't come. The scan continued. When I woke, my wrists ached. I went back to the hospital and checked the queue. There were 43 unscheduled scans now. I scrolled through them, my hands shaking. The injuries were worse, the timestamps closer together. The final scan was dated 3 days from now. I clicked on it. The image was a head CT. Massive intracranial hemorrhage, midline shift, herniation, the kind of finding that meant brain death. I checked the report. Time of study 0314. Patient name resident radiology self-scan. I closed the file. I didn't go back to the reading room. I tried to leave. I walked toward the exit. But the hallways seemed longer than they should have been. The lights dimmer, the air colder. I found myself in a part of the hospital I didn't recognize. Old equipment, outdated signage. A radiology suite that looked like it hadn't been used in decades, and in the center of the room, a scanner. The console was on, the screen glowing. I walked toward it slowly. On the screen, a scan was already loaded, my name in the patient field. The timestamp, 0314, 3 minutes from now. I looked at the scanner. The bore was open, waiting. I felt the pull. The same pull I'd felt every time I opened one of those unscheduled scans. I stepped onto the table. The straps tightened on their own. The machine hummed to life. And I realized I'd been here before. Many times before. I was still here. The scan began. I saw myself at the console, watching. Reading. Documenting, and I understood. I wasn't looking at the future, I was reading the past. Every unscheduled scan was a record of a moment I'd already lived. A loop I'd already entered, and every time I opened one, I was stepping back into the scanner. The screen flickered. A new scan appeared. Dated 1 hour from now. The findings. Unchanged. I am still on the table, still being read. Still waiting for the final image to load. Some scans don't capture a moment. They capture every moment. I haven't left the reading room. But sometimes, late at night, I see new studies appear in the queue, and I know they're not from patients in the ER. They're from someone still lying in the scanner, still waiting to be seen. Story 5. The room that reset, I stepped out to grab supplies, 30 seconds, maybe less. When I came back, the bed was made, the monitors wiped clean, the IV pole repositioned exactly 3 inches to the left. I thought housekeeping had come through. But housekeeping didn't work that fast, and they didn't rearrange the room to match a configuration I'd only seen in my head. I'm an ER technician, 12 years on the floor, most of it in the same 20-bed unit at Crescent Valley Hospital. My job is the scaffolding that holds the chaos together. Prepping rooms, running labs, turning over beds between patients, making sure the physicians have what they need before they know they need it. I know every inch of that ER, every drawer, every monitor, every quirk in the oxygen lines, which is why I noticed immediately when room 12 started resetting itself. It was subtle at first, small things. I'd leave the room to grab a blood pressure cuff, and when I'd return, the Sharps container would be in a different position. The pillow fluffed when I knew I'd left it compressed. The privacy curtain pulled exactly halfway, though I'd left it open. I assumed it was one of the nurses, maybe Carla, who had a compulsive need for symmetry, or Jake, who rearranged rooms when he was anxious. But when I asked, they both looked at me like I was losing it. "I haven't touched 12 all shift," Carla said. Jake shrugged. "That room's been empty since yesterday." I checked the board. He was right. Room 12 had been unassigned for 36 hours, but I'd been in there. I'd prepped it twice that morning. I went back to check. The room was pristine. Bed made with hospital corners. IV pole positioned at a perfect 90-degree angle to the bed. Monitors aligned. Everything exactly as it should be. Exactly as I would have arranged it. I stood in the doorway, staring. I hadn't made that bed. I hadn't positioned that pole. But it was perfect. Too perfect. I left the room and walked 10 feet down the hall to grab a saline flush from the supply cart. When I came back, maybe 15 seconds later, the bed had been stripped. The linens were gone. The mattress was bare. I froze. No one had passed me in the hall. No one had entered the room. I checked the hamper in the corner. Empty. I walked out again, slower this time, watching the door. I turned my back for 5 seconds. When I looked again, the bed was made. Fresh linens, tight corners, exactly the same as before. I pulled out my phone and took a picture. Then I stepped out of the room, counted to 10, and went back in. The bed was stripped again. I checked the photo. Same bed, same linens, documented. But now, it was bare. I stopped prepping room 12. I told the charge nurse it was having equipment issues. She reassigned it to maintenance. But the next night I was assigned there anyway. The system had auto-populated my name next to room 12 on the assignment board. 4 patients, all under my care, all in room 12. I went to the charge nurse. "I thought 12 was closed." She frowned at the board. "It's open, always has been. You told me yesterday." I didn't tell you anything." I pulled up the patient list. 4 names, 4 room assignments, all listed as active. I went to room 12. Empty. I checked the next bay over. Empty. I walked the entire ER. No patients matching the names on my list, but according to the system, I'd been caring for them all shift. I documented vitals, administered medications, noted changes in condition. I pulled up the entries. They were in my handwriting, my login, my timestamps. But I hadn't written them. I sat down at the nurse's station and stared at the screen. The entries were detailed, professional, accurate. They described patients I'd never seen, treatments I'd never given, observations I'd never made, and every single entry was tied to room 12. I went back to the room. This time I didn't leave. I stood in the center and waited. The air felt heavier, colder. The hum of the monitors seemed louder, though none of them were on. I looked at the bed. It was made. I watched it. And it began to unmake itself. The linens pulled back slowly, as if moved by invisible hands. The pillow sank. The IV pole shifted 3 inches to the left. I didn't move. When the bed was bare, it paused, and then it reset. The linens reappeared, smoothing themselves into place. The pillow fluffed. The pole returned to its original position. The room had rebuilt itself. I turned to leave. The door was gone. Not closed. Gone. Where the doorway should have been, there was only wall. Blank. Seamless. I walked toward it, reached out. My hand met solid drywall. I turned around. The room was different now. The bed was occupied. A patient lay there, facing away from me. IV running, monitors beeping softly. The kind of setup I'd arranged 1,000 times. I approached slowly. "Can you hear me?" The patient didn't respond. I walked around to the other side of the bed. It was me. Same face, same build, same ID badge clipped to the same scrubs. I stared at myself lying motionless on the bed. Eyes closed. Chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. I reached for the chart clipped to the footboard. Patient name, ER Tech, Room 12, continuous observation. The notes were in my handwriting. They described a patient who had been in Room 12 for an indeterminate length of time. No discharge plan, no diagnosis, just continuous observation. And at the bottom, a single line. Patient remains stable. Room resets every 90 seconds, tech assigned indefinitely. I looked at the monitors, my own vitals, steady, unremarkable. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was counting down. 90 seconds. I backed away from the bed. The room began to shift. The bed stripped itself. The monitors went dark. The IV pole folded inward. And then it reset. The bed remade. The monitors lit up. The pole extended. And I was still there. Both versions of me. I looked at the door. It was back. I ran toward it, grabbed the handle, pulled. It opened into Room 12, the same room, the same bed, the same patient, me. I tried again. Same result. Every door led back to Room 12. I stopped trying. I don't know how long I've been here. The clock resets every 90 seconds. The room rebuilds itself. The patient remains stable, and I keep prepping the bed. Because that's what I do. That's what I've always done. Some rooms don't discharge patients. They archive them. I'm still assigned to Room 12, still documenting vitals, still making the bed. And every 90 seconds I forget I've already done it. But somewhere beneath the reset I remember. I've been here before. I'll be here again. The room is very good at keeping records. Story 6. The Silent Pager. The first silent page came at 2:47 a.m. No text, no callback number, just a timestamp and a room number, Bay 14. I checked the board. Bay 14 was empty, had been all night. But when I walked past it, I felt something watching me from behind the curtain. Something that knew exactly when I'd arrive. I've been an attending ER physician for 11 years. I've worked every shift, seen every kind of case, made decisions in seconds that others take hours to consider. I carry a pager because the hospital system is old, and sometimes the only reliable way to reach me is through a device that hasn't been updated since 2003. I'm used to being paged at all hours. Traumas, codes, consults that can't wait. But I'd never been paged by silence. The first one arrived on a Thursday night, during a shift that had been mercifully quiet. I felt the buzz in my pocket, pulled out the pager, and looked at the screen. No message, no callback number, just a time stamp, 0247, and a location, Bay 14. I checked the ER board. Bay 14 was listed as unoccupied, had been since midnight. I walked over anyway. The bay was dark, curtain drawn, monitors off. No chart, no patient. I stood there for a moment listening. Nothing. I turned to leave. The pager buzzed again. Same timestamp. Same location. I looked at the curtain. It was perfectly still, but I felt watched. I pulled the curtain aside. Empty. I walked back to the nurse's station. One of the residents, Dr. Hollis, was reviewing labs. "Did you page me?" I asked. She looked up. "No. Why?" "I got paged to Bay 14, twice." She frowned. "That bay's been empty all night." I showed her the pager. She looked at the screen. "There's no message," she said. "I know," she shrugged. "System glitch. It's always breaking something." I filed it away and moved on. The next night I got 3 more, all silent, all time-stamped in the middle of the night, all pointing to empty rooms. Bay 14, Bay 9, Bay 3, I checked each one. Nothing. But every time I walked past those bays later in the shift, I felt it again. That pressure, like someone standing just out of sight. I started keeping a log, timestamps, locations, patterns. Over 2 weeks, I received 47 silent pages. They always pointed to empty rooms. They always came during the quietest part of the shift. And they always felt like summons. I started ignoring them, but the feeling didn't stop. I'd walk past Bay 14, and the air would grow colder. I'd glance at Bay 9, and I'd see the curtain move, though no one was there. I'd pass Bay 3, and I'd hear the faint hum of a monitor that wasn't on. The pages were leading me somewhere. I didn't want to follow, but one night I couldn't help it. I got paged to Bay 14 at 3:02 a.m. I walked over, pulled the curtain aside, and stepped inside. The room was different. The lights were dimmer, the air was stale. The monitors were old, models we'd retired years ago. I looked at the bed. There was a chart clipped to the footboard. I picked it up. The patient name was mine. I stared at it, my pulse hammering. The notes were detailed, written in a hand I didn't recognize. They described a physician experiencing disorientation, memory lapses, and progressive detachment from reality. The entries spanned months. The most recent note was dated tonight. Patient continues to respond to non-existent stimuli, remains unaware of current status. Observation ongoing. I set the chart down and backed out of the room. When I turned around, I was no longer in the ER. I was in a hallway I didn't recognize, older, narrower. The walls were painted a faded green I hadn't seen in years. I walked forward slowly. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. Doors on either side, all closed. I tried one, locked. I tried another, same. At the end of the hall, there was a nurse's station, abandoned. The computer monitors were dark, the charts stacked neatly, untouched. I looked at the board behind the desk. It listed patient assignments. My name was at the top. Assigned to Bay 14, Bay 9, Bay 3, continuous rotation. I checked the date. It was 3 years ago. I heard the pager buzz. I pulled it out. Bay 14, 0302. I looked at my watch. 0302. I was still in the moment, still in the page. I walked back down the hall. The doors were open now. Inside each room, a version of me. Standing, sitting, lying in the bed. All frozen, all waiting. I reached Bay 14. I stepped inside. The room reset. And I was back in the present. The ER was busy now. Patients in every bay, nurses moving quickly, monitors beeping in chaotic rhythm. I looked at the board. I was assigned to Bay 14. I walked over. A patient was there, middle-aged, stable, waiting for admission. I examined him, documented the findings, ordered labs. He looked at me. "You've been here before," he said. I paused. "I work here every night." "No," he said quietly. "You've been here, in this room, for a long time." I felt my chest tighten. "I'm your doctor," I said. He shook his head. "You were, but now you're just assigned." I left the room. I checked my pager. 12 new pages, all silent, all pointing to bays I'd already visited. I started walking. Bay 9, Bay 3, Bay 14. Every room felt the same, every patient looked familiar, and in every room they said the same thing. You've been here before. I stopped responding to pages, but the rooms kept calling, and eventually I stopped leaving. I'm still in the ER, still assigned to Bay 14, still making rounds, but the patients don't change, the shifts don't end, the pages don't stop. And every night at 3:02 I get paged to a room I never left. I don't know when I stopped being the attending and started being the patient. But somewhere in the archive there's a chart with my name on it, and someone is still updating it. Some decisions don't get made, they get deferred. And some physicians never leave the floor. I still carry my pager. I still respond. But the rooms I walk into aren't the ones I remember entering. And the patients I treat all have the same question. How long have you been here? I don't answer anymore, because I'm not sure I ever left. Story 7, the internal response officer and the hallway not on the map. The odor complaint came through at 3:22 a.m. Strong chemical smell, unidentified source, reported by night nursing on the 4th floor between wards 4C and 4D. I responded with my standard kit, expecting cleaning solvent or maybe a small spill from the labs. When I reached the location, I found a hallway I'd never seen before. Narrow, dimly lit, wedged between the two wards in a space that shouldn't exist. The walls were older than the rest of the hospital, covered in faded nameplates and darkened badge holders belonging to staff I didn't recognize. I pulled out the facility map on my tablet. The hallway wasn't there, but emergency call lights were flickering awake along the corridor, one after another, each panel displaying the same name. Marcus Holt. My name. I was being called to respond to an emergency in a hallway that didn't exist by someone using my own name to summon me. I've been an internal response officer at Brightwood Medical Center for 8 years. The role combines elements of security, facilities management, and emergency coordination. I respond to internal incidents, odor complaints, minor equipment failures, spills, environmental hazards, anything that requires immediate on-site assessment and remediation during overnight hours when specialized staff are off duty. The work requires versatility. I carry a response kit containing basic tools, safety equipment, spill containment materials, and documentation devices. I'm trained in hazmat protocols, basic electrical safety, plumbing diagnostics, and emergency communication procedures. I'm the first responder for problems that don't fit into neat categories, the person who determines whether an incident requires specialized backup or can be resolved with immediate intervention. Brightwood is a large facility, 12 floors, 4 wings, built in phases over 40 years. The original structure dates to 1982, with expansions added in 1995, 2008, and 2019. This patchwork construction creates occasional quirks, dead-end corridors from abandoned expansion plans, utility spaces that no longer serve their original purpose, architectural inconsistencies where old sections join new ones. I know the building intimately. 8 years of overnight response calls have taken me into every accessible space: mechanical rooms, storage closets, interstitial areas between floors where ductwork and piping run. I've learned the building's sounds, its smells, its rhythms. I can identify the source of most odor complaints within minutes based on location and description alone. The call on December 11th was different from the start. It came through at 3:22 a.m., radioed in by a night nurse on the 4th floor. Strong chemical odor, location unclear, somewhere between wards 4C and 4D. Smells like industrial solvent, possibly ammonia-based. No obvious source identified. Request internal response assessment. I acknowledged the call and gathered my kit: respirator, chemical detection meter, containment materials, flashlight, tablet with facility diagrams. The 4th floor is part of the 1995 expansion, patient wards, nursing stations, clean and well-maintained. I'd responded to several calls on this floor over the years. Nothing unusual, standard hospital incidents. I took the elevator to 4 and exited into the main corridor. The night nurse who'd called it in was waiting at the nursing station between wards 4C and 4D. "The smell is stronger down that way," she said, pointing to the corridor that connected the two wards. "We've checked all the patient rooms and storage areas, nothing unusual. But the odor is definitely coming from somewhere in that section." I thanked her and headed down the corridor, my chemical detection meter already active, sampling the air. The meter registered slightly elevated volatile organic compounds, nothing dangerous, but enough to confirm an unusual chemical presence. I followed the reading, walking slowly down the corridor, watching the meter's display climb incrementally. The strongest reading came from a section of wall between two patient room doors. I stopped, examining the wall. Blank painted surface, no vents, no access panels, no obvious source for a chemical odor. But the meter insisted the source was here, directly in front of me. I looked more carefully at the wall, running my flashlight beam across the surface. There, barely visible in the ambient lighting, a seam in the wall. Not a crack or damage, but a deliberate architectural line, suggesting a door or access panel. I pressed on the wall. It gave slightly, the pressure revealing what my eyes had initially missed. A door, painted the same color as the surrounding wall, with no handle or visible opening mechanism. I examined the door frame more carefully, finding a small card reader mounted flush with the wall, nearly invisible unless you knew to look for it. I tried my access card. The reader flashed green and the door clicked open. Beyond was a hallway I'd never seen before. It was narrow, maybe 4 feet wide, lit by old fluorescent fixtures that cast a greenish, uneven light. The walls were painted in a color that might once have been beige but had faded to a sickly yellowish gray. The floor was older tile, a pattern I recognized from the original 1982 construction, not the modern flooring used in the 1995 expansion. This hallway should not exist. The space between wards 4C and 4D was too narrow to accommodate a corridor. According to the facility diagrams, this was utility space, pipes, ducts, and structural supports, but not a walkable passage. I pulled out my tablet and opened the 4th floor blueprint. The area between the wards showed exactly what I expected. A narrow utility chase labeled mechanical access, no public entry. But I was standing in a hallway clearly designed for foot traffic, complete with overhead lighting and what appeared to be office doors along both walls. The chemical odor was stronger here, acrid and sharp, making my eyes water slightly. I pulled on my respirator and activated the detection meter. The VOC reading was significantly elevated, but still below the threshold requiring evacuation or hazmat response. I moved deeper into the hallway, checking the doors as I passed. Each door had a small nameplate, the kind used for office or exam room identification. But the names were unfamiliar and the format was outdated, printed on cardboard, inserted into metal holders, the style the hospital had used in the 1980s and early 1990s. Dr. Patricia Wendell, internal medicine nurse J. Carmichael, ward supervision Dr. Robert Hayes. Oncology consult, I tried one of the doors. Locked. I tried my access card, no reader, just a traditional key lock. I continued down the hallway, my flashlight beam picking out more nameplates, more locked doors. Then I saw something that made me stop. A badge holder mounted next to one of the doors, the kind that holds a staff ID badge for quick identification during rounds. The badge inside was dark, the photo faded almost to invisibility, but I could still read the name, Marcus Holt. I reached up to touch the badge holder, and as my fingers made contact, the emergency call light above the door flicked on. The illuminated panel displayed a name request, M. Holt, internal response required. I was looking at my own name on an emergency call panel in a hallway that shouldn't exist. I pulled out my radio. Internal response to dispatch. I'm following up on the 4th floor odor complaint. I found an unmapped corridor between wards 4C and 4D. Request you pull up architectural records and confirm this space is documented. The response came back after a brief pause. Copy that, internal response. Checking records now. I waited, watching the call light flicker above the door marked with my name. Internal response, we're showing no corridor in that location. 4th floor blueprints indicate utility space only, no public access. Can you confirm your current location? I looked around, searching for any identifying markers. I'm in a hallway approximately 40 feet long, running parallel to the main corridor between wards 4C and 4D. Multiple office doors, older construction, appears to be from the original 1982 building phase. Another pause, longer this time. Internal response, that doesn't match any documented space. Recommend you exit and we'll send a facilities team to investigate during day shift. Understood. I'm going to complete a quick assessment before I exit. Document the space for the facilities review. Copy that. Be advised. Your radio signal is degrading. We're barely reading you. I looked at my radio. The signal indicator showed weak reception, unusual for the interior of the building where repeaters should provide full coverage. I continued down the hallway, now documenting with my phone's camera. Photos of the nameplates, the emergency call panels, the faded tile floor. More emergency call lights were activating as I passed, each one flickering to life and displaying the same request. M. Holt, internal response required. The hallway curved slightly, continuing beyond what should be the physical boundary of the building. According to the blueprints in my memory, this corridor was now extending into space that should be exterior, outside the building envelope, beyond the walls. But the hallway continued, solid and real, its old fluorescent fixtures humming quietly overhead. I reached a junction where the hallway split into 2 branches. A directional sign mounted on the wall in the outdated hospital style pointed to various departments. Oncology ward, closed 1994. Psychiatric observation, closed 1988. Administrative offices, relocated 2001. All of the departments referenced had been closed or relocated years before I'd started working at Brightwood. But the sign was mounted permanently, suggesting this hallway had been in active use during those periods. I chose the left branch, following the sign toward the closed oncology ward. The hallway grew narrower, the ceiling lowering slightly, creating a compressed, uncomfortable space. The nameplates here were different, not staff names, but patient rooms. Room 4A, occupied 1989-1991. Room 4B, occupied 1987-1993. Room 4C, occupied 1990-1994. Each nameplate included occupation dates rather than current patient names, as though the rooms were displaying their own history rather than their present status. I tried the door to room 4A. It opened. Inside was a patient room, fully furnished but clearly unused for years. The bed was made with old-style hospital linens. The monitoring equipment was outdated, models I recognized from training materials about legacy systems but had never seen in operation. On the bedside table was a patient chart, the paper yellowed with age. I opened it. Patient name, Marcus Holt. Admission date, November 3rd, 1991. Diagnosis, undetermined neurological condition. Attending physician, Dr. Patricia Wendell. I felt the floor tilt beneath me, a wave of disorientation washing over me. I was 8 years old in 1991. I'd never been a patient at Brightwood. I'd grown up 3 states away. I flipped through the chart, progress notes, medication logs, observation records, all dated from late 1991 through early 1992. The handwriting was medical shorthand, difficult to parse, but I caught fragments. Patient continues to report disorientation, difficulty distinguishing between different time periods. Recurring episodes of temporal displacement. Patient describes experiencing events from future dates. Recommend continued observation in isolated ward to prevent cross-contamination with current timeline patients. I closed the chart and backed out of the room. The hallway had changed. Where there had been a clear path back to the junction, there was now only a wall. Seamless, as though the corridor had never extended in that direction. The only way forward was deeper into the oncology ward section. I walked, passing more patient rooms, each one marked with occupation dates from the late 1980s and early 1990s. Emergency call lights continued to activate as I passed, all displaying the same request. M. Holt, internal response required. I was responding to my own emergency calls in a ward that had been closed before I'd ever worked at this hospital. The hallway terminated at a large door marked Ward Administration, authorized personnel only. I tried my access card, not expecting it to work. The reader flashed green. I pushed the door open. Beyond was an office, a large administrative space filled with filing cabinets, desks, and old computer equipment from the early 1990s. On the main desk, a computer monitor was active, displaying what looked like a personnel database. I approached slowly, reading the screen. It showed a staff directory dated December 11th, 2024, today's date, but the names listed were unfamiliar, and the positions referenced departments that no longer existed. Oncology Ward Nurse Supervisor, Psychiatric Observation Coordinator, Temporal Studies Administrator. At the bottom of the list was a single entry that made my hands go cold. Marcus Holt, Internal Response Officer, Permanent Assignment, Non-Standard Corridor Maintenance. Status, active. I clicked on the entry. A personnel file opened showing employment records dating back to 1991. According to the file, I'd been employed at Brightwood Medical Center for 33 years, continuously assigned to internal response duties in corridors that were removed from standard facility maps. The file included photos, staff ID photos from different years. 1991, a photo of me at age 8 wearing a security uniform several sizes too large. 1998, a photo of me at 15, same uniform, same serious expression. 2005, a photo of me at 22, looking exactly as I'd looked when I'd actually started working at Brightwood in 2016. 2016, a photo identical to my current staff ID. 2024, a photo of me as I appeared now, taken from an angle I didn't recognize in a location I'd never posed for an official photo. The file listed my primary responsibility: monitoring and maintaining non-standard corridors that exist between documented hospital spaces, responding to emergency calls from staff and patients who exist in overlapping timeframes, ensuring that timeline-displaced personnel receive appropriate internal response support. I heard a sound behind me, footsteps in the hallway. I turned. A figure stood in the doorway wearing a hospital ID badge on a lanyard. The figure was me, but younger, maybe 25, wearing the same internal response uniform I currently wore. "You're early," the younger version said. "You're not supposed to find the corridor system until at least 2028, according to the standard progression." "What is this place?" I asked. "The spaces between," the younger me replied. "The hospital has layers, not just physical floors, but temporal layers, periods of its own history that never fully closed, old wards that still exist in their own time, staff members who keep working years after they left, patients who never fully discharged. Your job is to respond to incidents in these spaces. You've been doing it since you were 8 years old. You just don't remember the early years because you weren't old enough to process what you were experiencing. I didn't work here when I was 8. Not in the standard timeline. But you were a patient here in 1991 admitted for temporal displacement syndrome. You kept experiencing events from your future, including your future employment as an internal response officer. The doctors couldn't treat it, so they gave you a job instead. They made you an internal response officer for the non-standard corridors, the spaces where time doesn't work correctly. You've been responding to calls ever since, moving between different time periods of the hospital, maintaining the in-between spaces. That's impossible. You're standing in a corridor that doesn't exist on any map, looking at employment records showing you've worked here since childhood, talking to a younger version of yourself. Which part of this seems impossible compared to what you've already accepted? I looked at the computer screen, at the progression of ID photos showing me aging through decades I didn't remember working. How do I stop this? I asked. You don't, the younger me said. This is what you do, what you've always done. You respond to internal incidents in spaces that exist between the hospital's standard reality. Every odor complaint, every equipment failure, every unexplained emergency call, some of them are standard incidents, but some of them are breaches between time frames, and you're the one who investigates them. And if I refuse, if I leave this corridor and don't come back, then someone else will eventually take the role. But you're particularly good at it because you've been doing it for so long. You know the corridors, you know the patterns. You know which emergency calls are from the present and which ones are from 1987 or 2003 or 2031. 2031? The hospital's timeline extends in both directions. Sometimes you respond to calls from the future, departments that haven't been built yet, staff who haven't been hired yet, patients who haven't been born yet. It's all part of the same structure, just displaced in time. I looked around the office at the filing cabinets that presumably held records for other timeline-displaced staff. Am I the only one? I asked. No, there are others. Maintenance workers who repair equipment that won't be installed for another decade. Nurses who care for patients who died years ago. Doctors who consult on cases from multiple time periods simultaneously. The hospital needs people who can move between the layers, who can maintain continuity even when time becomes discontinuous. And I volunteered for this? The younger me smiled. You didn't have a choice. The displacement syndrome meant you were already experiencing it. The hospital just gave you a structure for it, turned a medical condition into an employment position. Now, instead of being a patient who randomly shifts between time frames, you're a responder who does it deliberately. I heard my radio crackle, the signal clearing suddenly. Internal response. We've got another odor complaint, this time on the 7th floor near the surgical suites. Can you respond? I looked at the younger version of myself. You should answer, they said. It's what you do. I keyed my radio. Internal response copy, I'll head there now. What's the nature of the odor? Described as medicinal, possibly anesthetic gas. Nursing staff reports it's coming from a surgical suite that's been closed since 2002. I felt a chill of recognition. I knew that surgical suite. I'd responded to a call there 3 years ago, or would respond to it in 2 years depending on which timeline I was currently occupying. Copy that, I said. I'm on my way. I looked back at the office, but the younger me was gone. The computer screen had changed, now showing a call log for my current shift. 3:22 a.m., odor complaint, 4th floor, non-standard corridor. Responded 3:47 a.m., odor complaint, 7th floor, closed surgical suite, pending 4:15 a.m., equipment failure, basement level, mechanical room from 1985, scheduled 5:30 a.m., emergency call, 3rd floor, patient room that won't exist until 2027. Scheduled. My shift continued for hours beyond what should be my clock-out time, the calls stretching across different time periods, different versions of the hospital. I left the office and found that the corridor had rearranged itself. now providing a clear path to a stairwell that would take me to the 7th floor. I walked, my response kit in hand, ready to investigate an odor complaint in a surgical suite that had been closed for over 2 decades. This was my job. This was what I did. I responded to internal incidents across the hospital's temporal layers, maintaining the spaces between, answering emergency calls from staff and patients who existed in different time frames but shared the same physical structure. I'd been doing it for 33 years, even though I'd only been alive for 41. The math didn't work in standard time, but in the non-standard corridors, time was just another variable to account for during incident response. Some buildings exist in more than 3 dimensions. They have depth in time as well as space, containing all their previous versions simultaneously, layered like pages in a book that's never quite finished being written. I walk between those pages now, responding to incidents that happen in different decades of the same location, maintaining corridors that connect the hospital's past to its present to its future. The emergency calls never stop coming. There's always another odor complaint from a ward that closed 20 years ago, another equipment failure in a mechanical room that won't be built for another 5 years, another patient in a room that exists in 3 different time periods at once. I've stopped asking when I am. I just respond to where I'm needed, moving through the spaces between, the internal response officer for a hospital that's larger in time than it ever was in space.